So today is my first day here in Panama. I've landed in this beautiful hostel. I like it a lot actually. I just wanted to talk about some of my first thoughts on Panama. It's very interesting and very different to all of the other Latin cities that I've been to because it feels like this weird mix of like an island of the US and Latin America all combined into one. And what I mean by that is like you'll go into like the shopping malls, right? And you'll see stores that I've recognized in Colombia, but then it'll be next to like a Krispy Kreme's and like a Burger King and all these like really popular American brands. It just feels like because Panama is like the middle of Latin America and the US, and I think that's perfectly exemplified when you're here. The currency is the dollar. Everything seems to be more expensive. It's really weird because there are certain things that are pretty cheap, and then there's random things like sunblock. Some electronics will be more expensive, but others will not be. I'm used to not paying tax because in Colombia, you know, the price that you see is the price that you get. The tax is already included, but this one is you get a price and you get like a 7% tax on it, so it's just a lot different. Everything's more expensive than Colombia. Walking around, it just feels like there's a lot of money here. It's crazy the difference in between like the outskirts of the city versus like the big area where all like the tall buildings are. And that reminds me a lot of like Cartagena. I don't think like the outside of the city are like slums or like super bad, although some of the parts that we drove through were pretty sketchy. It reminds me of Cartagena in the sense that like you have one big area where everything's pretty much popping. You have all the nice restaurants, all the nice malls, all the really tall buildings. Once you get out of this strip, it just feels like a regular Latin American city. The people are very dark here. I don't mean that in like a bad way. It's more like a really interesting mix because I want to say they look like totally black, but they don't look totally Latin. The best thing I can describe it to is like Caribbean. They have like such an interesting Caribbean look with a little bit of indigenous inside. Being in Colombia, you know, we have all kinds of colors, whereas when you come here, especially in Panama City, it's just like all brown and like they say canela, right? It's like a nice moreno color. They have curly hair, they have straight hair. It's nice. I like that skin tone a lot actually. As I was coming into the city, the thing that I noticed is that there were a lot of cars here. People here earn in dollars. It's a lot easier to buy cars, and the way that the whole neighborhoods are set up is you kind of have to drive everywhere. Taxis aren't like super expensive. They're not super cheap either. Like when I wanted to go to a mall which was a little bit outside of the strip, that cost me like $5 one way. Colombia would probably cost me like $3 one way. I think landscape wise reminds me a lot of Las Vegas, because in Las Vegas you have like a strip mall area, and then that's where all like the tall buildings are, but there's like a lot of people that live on the like suburbs or the outside of it that's kind of like in their own world. And it's really weird seeing like the differences in buildings, right? Because when you're driving from the airport, I personally like taking public transportation, so I took the metro when I wanted to come to the hostel. I took the metro, I took the bus, and then from the bus stop I took like a taxi here, just so I can get to know the city and kind of understand the layout of the city. Public transportation here is actually really good. All you gotta do is get one of these like cards. I think every bus thing costs like 25 cents, and if you go on the metro, it costs like 35 cents. Really efficient, always on time, very large. The roads are well developed. It doesn't seem there's like a lot of holes in it. Right now we're supposed to be in summer. Panama for the last 3 or 4 years has been getting a lot of rain around this time when it's normally supposed to be summer. Right now it's like beautiful and sunny, and then it was like this in the morning, but literally like in the afternoon it started raining like crazy, like the craziest storm I've ever seen. Super heavy rain, and then it just stopped and it's going back to sun. I think that's just that tropical weather where it can go from like one extreme to the other in the span of a few hours. Something I noticed immediately, the people here are pretty obese. I'm not gonna lie, kind of reminds me a lot of America. Most of the people here kind of have a gut, and for the women it's either they're like super obese or they're like thin and extremely like nice body, and there's some people in the middle, but for the most part you're gonna find that people kind of go into one of those two categories, leaning towards like the overweight side, almost potentially obese. There's a lot of obese people here, and that's not just with the darker skinned people, that's with the lighter skinned people too. And I've noticed that a lot in the men as well. They just kind of have like a bigger, heavier build. And I asked about that, and someone who worked here, and she told me it's because food in Panama is just a bunch of fried stuff essentially. I think living in Colombia has warped your sense of like how many beautiful women you can see walking around everywhere. I hate saying this because I know it sounds really offensive. I think just Colombians are just really the most attractive people in Latin America. I haven't been to Argentina. I've heard like that's definitely a thing, but out of all the countries I've been to, percentage of the total population that is attractive, like in Colombia, for example, like Pereira, right? You go literally every corner, you're gonna see a hot girl walking around, whereas here it's a lot less. You still kind of see like the boob jobs and the surgeries and stuff, but it's very uncommon compared to places like Colombia. I already know personally though that I could never live in a place like this. One, I'm not a huge fan of the weather because I like hot and humid, but here it just kind of feels like I don't really want to do anything. I just kind of want to sit around and just like drink a beer and relax, which is interesting because I don't really get that vibe from the people from Panama. It seems that they're pretty hard workers, even though they're just not the most friendly. I've had some really interesting conversations with like the taxi drivers, but in general, I wouldn't say they're really friendly people like they are in, for example, like Medellín or Manizales. Like the Paisa people are just extra friendly, whereas here it doesn't seem to be the case at all. Also, something that surprised me is that there's like a lot of Asian people here. It's really interesting to me hearing people like speak Chinese or Cantonese and not speak English and speak Spanish. Coming from LA, I'm just so used to everybody speaking English in another language. And there's a lot of really good Asian food here. There's like traditional Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants, Korean restaurants. I've noticed a lot of gringos walking around too. So it's just a very diverse mixed group of people that you can find here in Panama. And that's something you can expect from like a capital city like this, but I think because Panama is such a center of trade and business, so many people are flocking here, which makes sense for business, but I personally would not live here. I still need to check out the beaches though, because I really want to see what those are like. I don't know if you guys ever stayed in a hostel before, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're younger. Great way to meet people. I'm married now, but when you're single, it's a great way to like meet people. Hookups happen very easily at hostels as well. It's just kind of a common thing. And it's really interesting, the currency, because they use dollars, but the coins are like specific to Panama. It's literally like US and Latin America, boom, smashed and had a baby. And I feel like I'm in this weird mix of my two cultures because I see things from both that I can relate with. I'm just like, ooh, there are arepas, and you know, there's some companies that are popular in Colombia. And then you walk down, it's like, oh, those are really popular in the US. Oh, they have a Wetzel's pretzels, right? I'm gonna continue to vlog my whole entire journey here so you guys can see what's up. But my initial thoughts, Panama's cool, very expensive, not so friendly people, very different from Colombia, but the public transportation is very efficient, even though it seems that you need a car to kind of get everywhere in the city, which I personally don't like. I think it's pretty beautiful on the outside, but the weather to me is not too great. It's a little too hot for me. I like humid like this, but would like it to be a little cooler. The weather feels really like heavy, you know, and I'm just not a huge fan of that. I miss you too.